Thank you, Dr. Guma. Thank you. Thank you very much for staying on time. We are in our last but really fascinating panel. This panel will focus on human rights. We have outstanding researchers, particularly from the field, who will be speaking to us about the human right. We'll invite Kabane. I don't see Kabane. Kabane. Kabane ninjirtu. Kabane is oh no. Kabane Nayama. Esa de sitarre. Human rights. Okay, until Kabane comes, the panelists Felix Horn, Haptamu, and John, and Kabane herself. Huh? Yeah, he's here. Yeah. Please come on stage. Thank you. Bona, can you get Kabane, please? Until then, a couple of announcements. Keep your name tag, the badge that you were given when you paid today. If you lose your badge where you sleep, at the bar, at the dinner, at the party, you are going to pay us again. It doesn't matter what. Keep these papers. They are very important. So tomorrow when you come, you have to show the one to get in. Otherwise, you will pay. The other point is there is going to be a cultural concert tonight, a fascinating one featuring Abdi Nuresa and Jambo Jote. There are tickets on sale outside. Get your ticket. The revenue, the proceeds will be going to OSA to organize this kind of conference. Please buy the ticket as well. There is also be a limited dinner for those of you who are going to stay around. Get dinner. So we have a full package evening as well. Now I leave it to Kabane.
We are pleased to have this panel. We did lose one of our members. We're disappointed, but it gives us more time for discussion. So we are going to open this panel as a round table. It started in concept as a round table, and we invited Felix to come from Human Rights Watch from Canada with the assumption that we will have some discussion. I've had several comments during the day that there's a lot of information going out, and it wouldn't hurt to have some information coming back from the audience about how this is being received, what ideas are we need to probe a little bit deeper, more deeply, and this will give us an opportunity to do that. So instead of limiting ourselves to just 5 minutes of discussion, Felix is going to raise key issues around this issue of the Oromo in human rights experience in Ethiopia. And then the second paper will demonstrate what very specific use can be made of the interview material that is garnered in the research, determining patterns and looking for areas of very specific sorts of research and implications. And then I will lead a discussion on the experience that we had as a community of people interested in the Oromo, in particular when Claire Beston's report, Because I Am Oromo, came out last October. And at that point, it will be very interesting to hear what the audience's experience with that report has been, and collectively discuss the implications for research and for advocacy of material like that. Do we need more of it? Do we need something different? What did you find from that particular report. She wasn't able to be here, but we wanted her work to be represented in this conference because it was a very important event in our community in the last year. So it's my pleasure to introduce Felix Horn, who is Human Rights Watch researcher with a focus on the Horn of Africa. So we know Felix's work, many of us who are interested in human rights, and it is my pleasure that he's here. I told him, I think it would have been absurd for us to have this discussion without him.
Thank you. So rather than go through sort of the litany of human rights abuses against the Oromos, which I think everyone in this room very clearly knows and understands, I thought I would kind of reflect on some of the challenges in Ethiopia in terms of gathering this type of research based on my own personal experience. And then very much looking forward to the discussion around advocacy, because what Human Rights Watch does, along with Amnesty, is we produce reports, we do research into human rights issues, but we also try to translate that research into advocacy successes and advocacy impacts. That's obviously very difficult to do in the context of Ethiopia, a government that doesn't want to listen to the likes of Human Rights Watch or Amnesty. But there are opportunities because Ethiopia is a massive partner with the West, with the United States, with various bilateral donors in Europe, with the European Union, with the World Bank and other institutions. So there's lots of opportunities there, lots of frustrations too, of course, but lots of opportunities which would be good to discuss. So some of the challenges, and when we have our annual gathering at Human Rights Watch, all the researchers from around the world get together and talk about the different challenges we face. I feel I get the most bragging rights. I have some of the most difficult challenges in terms of getting information on my two countries, Ethiopia and Eritrea being the other ones. I mean, first of all, the country is largely closed, excuse me, to human rights, to international human rights organizations. So it's very difficult for Amnesty, for Human Rights Watch, for CPJ to go in and to do research. When we do go in, we're harassed, we're followed, and there are huge concerns over our own personal safety. More importantly, the individuals that we speak with, there are huge concerns over their safety. There's many cases we've documented where individuals were arrested for allegedly speaking to Human Rights Watch and other organizations. In most of those cases, those individuals did not speak to us or to other organizations, but that was kind of the impetus for the arrest. Similarly, we documented many cases where individuals that spoke to reputable media outlets, like Voice of America, Deutsche Welle, the BBC, were arrested shortly after speaking with them. So there is a very well-founded fear inside Ethiopia of individuals speaking to organizations who do this sort of work. And of course, for local organizations based inside of Ethiopia, the Charities and Societies Proclamation, the NGO law, that was passed in 2009 has virtually decimated independent civil society that works on the areas of human rights, good governance, rule of law things. I mean, there are small organizations that are doing some really amazing things, but they're permitted to do those things because they're small, they kind of keep their heads down. I mean, I would love to be able to mention who they are, but of course, if I were to mention who they are, then they wouldn't be able to do what they do. So it's very difficult to get information out of Ethiopia. When we speak about what is needed in terms of advocacy, there isn't a lot of information coming out. Some of the other challenges that we face when we do find victims that are willing to speak, there's still a fear. There's a fear about revealing certain details. There's often a fear about the translators we use, if perhaps they don't know who the translators are, or the fixtures that we use to connect us to different victims in different communities. And those are all very well-founded fears. Unfortunately, I don't speak Oromo, so we need a translator. One of the other challenges is the government has been very successful in casting Human Rights Watch and Amnesty as groups that are trying to overthrow the government, that are trying to destabilize the country, that are trying to stop Ethiopia from developing, none of which, of course, is true. But it does mean that individuals that we speak with in neighboring countries who are perhaps refugees are often nervous about speaking to us because they've just had this perspective, through state-run television, through state-run media, that Human Rights Watch is somebody that's dangerous. They're against Ethiopia, which of course is not true. I was having dinner with an Ethiopian friend, a non-Oromo, some time ago, who's well educated. He's no longer in Ethiopia. He's well known in the country, and we talk about everything. We talk about politics. We talk about human rights. We talk about relationships. We talk about all kinds of stuff. And finally, he was like, Felix, like, we've known each other for a long time. Can I ask you a question? I'm like, sure, of course. He's like, Human Rights Watch, is it a neoliberal institution? Which is what the Ethiopian government constantly says. Human Rights Watch is a neoliberal institution. And I was like, well, what do you think neoliberal means? And he's like, I don't know. I think it means you're a terrorist group. I was just like, this is somebody that I've established a relationship for a long time. He knows better. He knows all of the reports that are out there. There's still that sort of nagging doubt in the back of his mind from all of that propaganda that comes from the government about speaking to us. I just thought that was a very powerful illustration of kind of what we're up against. So we do spend a lot of time speaking to refugees. And when it comes to finding abuses against, say, the Oromo, it's not difficult. There are, as you know, there are thousands of Oromo refugees outside of Ethiopia who are willing to share their stories. And despite all of these challenges, I think there are some new opportunities recently that have presented themselves. And I think the use of social media in Ethiopia is a real opportunity for information sharing. I was amazed during the protests that swept through Oromo last year, the use of Twitter. And that was the first time I had seen Twitter really used as a tool in Ethiopia to get word out to the international community about what was happening. I know there's a number of people in this room that played a key role in disseminating that information. And in terms of all the information coming out about the Oromo protests real time, I mean, 90% of it was from Twitter or Facebook. It was really quite incredible. And the Oromo protests to me kind of encapsulate just the control that the Ethiopian state has on the flow of information and how it is just very difficult to get information out. If it wasn't for Twitter, there would have been very little media coverage of what was a major, major event. I mean, there were, as everyone knows, there were thousands of people arrested. There was excessive force used by the security forces. There's still thousands of people in detention. I mean, it was a really, really major event that should have been a big story internationally, but there was very little coverage. And there was something on the BBC, as we saw earlier. There were a few major outlets that covered it, but they could not get information. I mean, a lot of them are calling us. We want to talk to people inside the country. Can you connect us to people? A number of foreign journalists reported trying to go from Addis to the different places where the protests were happening. They were turned back at roadblocks. A number of Ethiopian journalists, Addis-based from the state-run media, obviously wasn't covering it in any detail, but some of the other independent publications that were around at the time were trying to access the area. They were turned back. Some of the journalists were detained. In the weeks after the protests kind of calmed down, when foreign journalists could finally get into those areas, they found a population that was too scared to speak, understandably so. We use various techniques to get information out of the country, despite some of these challenges. But individuals are very scared of speaking on the phone because of the perception of telephone surveillance. We did a report that came out in March of last year called, what was it called? They Know Everything We Do, which looked at the extent of telephone surveillance, email surveillance, and the like. And although the Ethiopian government has the ability to monitor everyone's telephones, it's not happening on near the scale that everyone thinks, but it doesn't really matter because the perception that your telephone is being monitored prevents you from speaking freely on the phone. And we see that a lot with trying to get information out around the Oromo protests. So when we do advocacy around the world now, and we sit down with the government and we're going through this, the list of standard human rights issues in Ethiopia, and we go through the journalists and all that sort of stuff. When it gets to talking about Oromo issues, it's amazing how little people know. mean, we think that everyone knows about, what happens in Oromia, what happened during the Oromo protests. And I mean, certainly, the embassies have an understanding in Addis of what happened and things like that. But for the most part, individuals don't know the extent of what happened there or what has happened historically to the Oromo. So I think we have a lot of work to do in that area. Interestingly enough, one of the key ways through which information did spread during the Oromo protests was OMN, the Oromia Media Network. And so there were a number of individuals that were arrested for watching OMN during those protests. There were a number of individuals arrested for speaking to OMN during those protests, and OMN was jammed at the time. And I only say that because it was very interesting. Governments around the world at the time were starting to say that Ethiopia is easing its restrictions on jamming, because they were not jamming ESAT anymore, they were not jamming Deutsche Welle, and they were not jamming VOA. So those are like the three main stations that were frequently jammed. So they stopped jamming them, but they started jamming OMN. But that just didn't seem to, that information didn't get to the decision makers around the world. It's quite interesting. So I mentioned refugees. So we spend a lot of our time interviewing refugees from different communities. And it's hard to sort of, yeah, I mean, it depends on the issue that we're looking at. But in general, when it comes to the Oromo, I find that they fall into two different categories. Maybe 80% of the people we interview, 80% of the Oromos we interviewed fall into one of two categories. The first one is very young Oromos. So these are individuals who are 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, many of whom fled after the Oromo protests last year, but even some that left beforehand. And I'm always amazed when I interview them at how diverse they are in terms of political opinion, religion, where they're from, view of their future, view of their past. It's really quite amazing. But what is equally amazing is that they've had the exact same experience in detention, that they were arrested usually because they were seen to be, well, you know the story. They were dissenting against government. They were accused of being part of the opposition. Sometimes that was the OLF, often it was the OLF, but sometimes they were accused of belonging to legally registered opposition parties. And usually they were mistreated in detention, and they were asked to either confess to something that they clearly didn't do, or they were asked to provide information about other individuals that may be mobilizing against government. And they got out and they decided to leave the country. And it strikes me that they're so angry. There's so much anger and frustration that, that most of them aren't overly political. They just want to become engineers, doctors, lawyers. That's what they're going to university for. And then all of a sudden that future is taken away. And then they're in a country where it's difficult to get their refugee mandate. It's difficult to, they're harassed by security there, et cetera, and they're very angry. And when you're angry and you have nowhere to turn, what do you do? And you hear so much discussion in the refugee communities about, about the potential for violence. And so, the Ethiopian government obviously doesn't want, armed groups to be flourishing in its country. And it just seems like all of these policies and all of this repression against minority groups is actually creating an environment where armed opposition groups can flourish. It's a very confusing strategy for me. And every time I do an interview with a young Oromo, it comes out very, very powerfully. The second group of people are those that are much older, have been in and out of prison 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. You know the stories. And I'm not going to compare abuses between different ethnic groups, but one thing that does strike me is when an Oromo has been in prison because of a supposed link to the OLF, that they continue that cycle. Once they're released, invariably they go back in. It's just, time and time and time again that comes up in interviews. It's really quite incredible. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it there. I'm at 13. Okay. Yeah, I'll leave it there. But looking forward to discussion on advocacy and what we can do together to improve the situation for the Oromos. Thank you.
And our second paper is co-authored by Haptamu Dugo, who is an experienced journalist himself and now a master's degree holder in conflict analysis and teaching communications here at Howard University this last year. And his co-author is a retired dentist, Joanne Eisen, we know as G2 Roba, who has taken a great interest, first in Fourth Amendment issues, and now in specifically looking at the challenge of proving intent. Genocide is often, it's too often a word thrown around in accusatory fashion and in an extremist sense. But genocide is provable, and the information that these two are collecting is a very careful study of specific information that can lead to a legally defensible case for genocide. So I introduce their paper to you and ask that you pay careful attention, because they are asking that people who have more information of this type can strengthen the hand of those who would argue and make a very good international case. So, welcome.
So thank you, Bonnie. Now I don't have to speak because you said it. So when we think of genocide, we think of Rwanda, but that's not how genocide always unfolds. The man who coined the word genocide said, generally speaking, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation. It is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups, with the aim, the intent of annihilating them. In order to change human rights abuses to actual genocide, we need intent. The reason that genocide is important is that a global light will be turned onto the acts of the Habesha people. If you can find intent to destroy a nation or a group, national, ethnical, religious, or racial, then you are seeing genocide as defined by international law, and you can bring a case in international courts. So this is what we're attempting to do. And with Bonnie's help, we recently updated this rough draft, and we found genocide. We want to find more, and we want your help. So if you know of any people who have suffered, we would like to talk to them. Thank you. Tamu will now give you the horrible act.
You want to continue?
No.
Okay. Thank you again. So we are here to depress you again. This is a very, very difficult and not an entertaining topic. But of course, you know, what Phillips from Human Rights, Felix said from Human Rights Watch, like restriction of information, lack of access to information is really also the trouble that we face as we do this research, and we continue to face that problem. So we share that problem with many human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and a lot of researchers in academic institutions who try to get as much information as possible out of Oromia and Ethiopia. So this topic is sexual atrocities as a tactic of slow genocide in Oromia, Ethiopia, death by 1,000 secret cuts. The objective of this research was to, the Oromo have suffered a slow genocide by attrition. This paper focuses on sexual atrocity as a tactic to reduce reproductive capacity of targeted Oromo elite men and women. Show Abyssinian practices of the covering up of sexual atrocities. Examine the cultural and psychological shame associated with sexual torture, restricting the availability of data.
So basically, secrecy and slow genocide. In Ethiopia, the culture of secrecy and the presence of foreign donors and visitors have forces the regime to engage in in genocide by attrition, small by small, piece by piece, chipping at the population systematically. Instead of death by one giant visible cut with a machete, club, or spear as occurred in Rwanda, in Oromia, there is a death by 1,000 secret cuts. There is an ongoing slow genocide during which over several decades and regime change, millions have perished. The goal of Ethiopia's regime have been to destroy the Oromo people and other peoples of the south without the notice or opprobrium and cessation of funding by donor countries. This is really very important because, if the president of the United States goes to Ethiopia and says that the EPRDF is a democratically elected government, it's not holding it accountable. It's more like giving an inspiration for the regime to carry out more of those atrocities. So that's the point that illustrates. Sex crimes as genocide, this is really what we are focusing on in this paper. You have the paper, I'm not going to take too long, you can read it. We handed out some papers. In order for atrocities, even globally visible, horrific rapes like in Rwanda and Bosnia to qualify as genocide, there has to be intent associated with that kind of atrocity. So they call it special intent, and that means intent to destroy the group in part or in whole. It doesn't have to be 5,000 people, 5 million people. If there is intent to destroy someone because they're a member of a group, even if it's one person, that would qualify as genocide. The victims of torture, including sexual torture and rape, are generally incarcerated in political prisons. They consist of activist leaders, successful business people, student protesters, those who were accused of any form of political dissent, and families and relatives of the Oromo intelligentsia. There is a presence of targeted groups, the Oromo nation, upon whom measures were imposed to prevent or reduce births. They call it, some of the prisoners who were tortured in prisons call it virtual castration, according to the report by Advocacy, a Minnesota-based human rights organization. So the pattern of sexual atrocity comes from the top government officials and is indicative of intent to destroy a group, as a report by Advocates of Minnesota indicates. Unique torture of Oromo men having weight tied to their testicles is one of the very troubling areas of human rights that even us Oromos are unwilling to, or not comfortable talking about. So this is referred to by as virtual castration. Over half of all prisoners subjected to torture in prisons. The suspension of weights from genitalia of men has been reported as having occurred in various prisons. Medicine and sexual torture. We spoke to a urologist from chief of urology at Glen Cove Hospital in Nassau County, New York, to just find out what happens when somebody is sexually tortured. So Dr. Eric Hochberg, chief of urology at Glen Cove Hospital, Nassau County, New York, confirmed this fear. The fastening of heavy weights to the testicles could result in significant damage to the testicles themselves, or possibly the vasa differentia or spermatic cords. This could lead to severe pain and possibly infection. In addition, hormonal deficiency and or possibly infertility may result. The psychological aspect of male sexual torture, perhaps the most damaging, as victims tend to relieve the trauma or the memory. So really, let's prove that really sexual atrocities are actually genocide. So we didn't have enough data or interview enough number of people, but as I said earlier, what matters is really intent in this case. You don't have to talk to a million different people. So again, in this case, we talked to a couple of people who underwent sexual atrocities, men, who we identify as volunteer one and volunteer two in this research. Uh, so the interviews are important because they transform torture into intentional genocidal acts. A common theme emerged from responses indicating that survivors were targeted not just as individuals, but as members of the group, the Oromo. Bonnie Halcombe has been very instrumental in helping interview the survivors. She's here. Thank you, Bonnie. Fayera played a key role in tracking down the survivors and keeping us in touch with them, as well as in interpreting the testimonial interviews that Bonnie and G2 Dr. Eisen conducted. So we really appreciate the courage of the men who came forward telling us their stories. It's actually very coward to not tell real stories that happen. So volunteer one says, they made me sit on a sharp metal object and hung metal weights on my testicles for 3 hours at a time. They tied me down to the edge of a pit, a hole. The metal weight pulls down the testicles of the genital. You and other Oromo people who have risen up to remove us from this country are not going to live from now on. People like you will not also be born, and this is your end. You will not live and you will not also reproduce. Even if we release you from here, you will never reproduce. The prison official who said this was Inspector Talawan. Volunteer one knows 3 other Oromo prisoners who died after suffering similar acts of sexual atrocity in Maakalawi. So volunteer two's testimony also, tells us the fact that, the sexual atrocity that's inflicted on them goes beyond them because of the verbal information that they're provided by prison guards who tortures them about, their kinds not being able to reproduce. So they beat me, they put heavy weight on my reproductive organ, they put long wood bars in between my legs. The first person is Moni, the butcher is Moni Mangasha, he's a chief inspector. He was a security person. There are more than 500 Oromo prisoners in the dark cells of Maakalawi. We don't know each other, but we hear each other roaring like cows being slaughtered. We hear each other, always crying in Afan Oromo after midnight. Volunteer two's testimony continued. When asked about what he was told during the torture, he testified officials said to him, people like you should not live on this land. You don't own any land and you don't have any right here. People like you should not be born in the future. The person who said that to me was Alamayo, and he was an inspector at Maakalawi. Another one was Tazerra, and all of them say that we would perish. Prisoners below my cell hear me yelling, crying, and ask whose turn it's going to be next. So basically, that is what's happening in the prisons. Perpetrators, the have government continuously denies committing these acts in its dungeons in Maakalawi and other places. So the perpetrators' denial for dollars. The past is so infused into the present that acts and attitudes of the past explain the need for and the extent of cover-ups. The conquest and domination of the southern peoples was accomplished with foreign weapons and foreign aid. The castration of vanquished foes stood out as one of the most egregious issues of the Europeans had regarding Abyssinian behavior as well. After the Battle of Adwa in March 1896, many Italian soldiers were castrated. About 7% of Italians who returned home were castrated. Menelik said, this is how Menelik's soldiers, bring a halt to the enemy's capacity to reproduce. This really shows the general attitude, even towards foreigners, of Abyssinians, that they want to limit the reproductive capacity of the people that they perceive as enemies or potential enemies. Uh, so I'm not saying all Abyssinians do this. I'm saying Abyssinians who are in government actually do this. So it's important to make that caveat. Conclusions. After Bandura wrote, given the many mechanisms for disengaging moral control at both the individual and collective level, civilized life requires, in addition to humane personal standards, safeguards built into social systems that uphold compassionate behavior and renounce cruelty. In Ethiopia, in order to in other pre-genocidal and genocidal cultures, these safeguards do not exist. They will not be able to continue to fund the immoral genocidal behaviors if outside aid is seized. When I say they, I mean the Ethiopian government. My time is about to be up. My presentation is going to be up as well. We asked the victims who, have suffered this to come forward and talk to us and give us information. We will make sure that we will code your information if you don't want your name released. So we really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So since we were not able to have Claire with us, I volunteered to highlight her report, at least here, and honor it in this meeting. I think that in our roundtable format, we welcome you to think seriously about the report. I think that Felix has raised very important issues about the challenges to conduct research in an area where there is such a closed and such tight control over the activities of the researchers and over what happens to those who give testimony. I would like to invite those of you who have ideas about how this might be done safely to share them. I would like to ask you to think together about what a report like Claire's. Oromo, could you put the cover? The one you had up at the beginning? Good. How many of you have read this report? This, Because I Am Oromo? About a third of us. I recommend this report to you. People made great sacrifices to bring the material and the information about the conditions that Oromos face in Oromia. Claire, in fact, our speaker for tomorrow, actually was interviewed by Claire in the making of this report and arrested soon after. Perhaps he will share with us the exact connections between those events. Claire herself has not returned to do research in Ethiopia, even though technically, Felix tells me, Amnesty International is not banned from the country. It's often reported that it is because there is such an unfriendly relationship, an unwelcome environment between officialdom and the representatives of Amnesty, and possibly Felix can enlighten us a little bit more about that, or perhaps our speaker can as well. Those of you who read it, I ask you to share with us if you have what your experience has been with it. Does it resonate? Do you find it to be accurate? If not, where are the areas that need to be further investigated? Did you try to share it with others? What response did you get? What kind of use can be made of this sort of document? Because several people have taken hits for the courage that they had and the creativity they had in bringing this forward and in putting it before the public. And what comment can you offer to our collective discussion? If you've not read it, I think that it's something that you need to consider seriously. So let us discuss a couple of things. One is an assumption that the kind of repression and the kind of suffering that the Oromos go through are exclusive to the Oromo, and that when the group is not heard and when there's not much of a response, tendency is to go deeper and deeper into to making the case for the type of suffering, to make it more detailed, and to try to get the message across in a way that would be more emotional or more dramatic. And I think that this tendency is causing the Oromo to become more isolated in thinking that this isn't unique to them. I have learned a lot from Fayera, who was cited in the earlier report, in the earlier paper, who began to work with a group called TASK. TASK is Torture, Abolition, and Survivors Support Coalition. They work with groups across ethnic groups, across national groups, across geographic and economic groups, to look at the commonalities in what they have experienced. And in so doing, have built connections and have built allies and have built friends and understanding among peoples, and can begin to bring out the patterns that have affected their peoples. And I think that in many cases, my experience has been that the Oromo, for the size of the population and the nature of the common experience that Oromos have relatively few international friends. And I think it's something that we need to pay special attention to. The kind of report that Amnesty International has produced is potentially a tool for looking at commonalities rather than difference, at commonalities of experience of peoples who have suffered this way, and to build allies and to begin to work to disclose what Oromos have in common with others rather than the uniqueness. I put that out there for people to consider. So let's open this up for for answers to my question. What is your experience with this report? What advice, what thoughts do you have about where research goes from this point in terms of types of research and in terms of advocacy?
I read, because I'm an Oromo, most probably 2 or 3 days after it came, I read, and the first action I took was I became a member. I went and donated some money, became a member, and I sent email to the friends that I had, because this kind of work, after reading what they did, I understood how much time and how much money and how much courage it took to produce this kind of an article. There were people who followed my footsteps and became members, because I've heard from some people who are now being contacted from Amnesty International to even go and vote for board members, to that extent. Because once you become a member, then you become part of the organization. And in order to run this kind of work, you have to have financial support. If there is no financial support, these people cannot go to wherever they can go, either to Somalia or to Kenya or to other places where Oromo refugees are, to interview more of these stories and keep on producing this kind of accurate information. And my pledge today those of you who are here today, please go and read this and click on their contact information and become a member. It doesn't matter whether you contribute $10 or $100, it will help. And if we become support and contribute some money, then the people who are working and doing this kind of research will have uh, um, backing, and they will continue, and they will keep on working. And at the same time, please keep on reading and give them some instructions, some comments. There are comments where we can share information and where we can encourage them, because these people who are involved in this kind of work, they are human beings like us. They need some kind of encouragement. They need some kind of feedback, or even sometimes they can get good suggestions that they can use to do a very good investigative work. And because of that, let us not just listen and keep quiet. Let us take action and get involved. If we get involved, we can let other people know about our situation. And the other thing is advice that Bonnie has been giving us for so many years now, for the last 27, 29 years. Please, when you go home, don't sit down and wait. Contact your congressman, contact your senator, and send them email, send them the website, uh, go to your church, ask them to try to speak the language that they speak. The first thing that you have to go and ask your church people or your mosque people is, first ask them the simple thing. Ask them to go and pray for the Oromo people. Nobody, no one Christian will refuse to say, no, I will not go and pray for the Oromo people. None, none. I have tried, I have convinced the whole Senate. They will do that. The second step is, once they start praying for the Oromo people, they will come back and they say, who are these Oromos? Who are they? Then give them Google link. Thanks to technology, there are thousands and thousands of information about the Oromo people. If people go on Google, they can find out what is going on and what is happening to us. And after that, we have to start creating a group who can go and see the prisoners in Oromia today. In Bale province, there are over 3,000 Oromo intellectuals with bachelors and masters who are in prison today. Just in Bale, in Bale prison. And we are not doing much work to bring these people. Why they are there? Leave the people in Kaliti and Maikalawi. There are hundreds and hundreds of people who are in secret prisons today. But in our case, people who are against the Oromo people are working 24 hours a day, and we who are under the problem, who are suffering all this genocide and everything, we are sleeping 24 hours a day. We are sleeping, and the other people who are destroying us are working on us 24 hours a day, and 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They are working day in and out because they want to make us the native people, like those in Australia. You guys know what happened to the natives in Australia, and there are other things that there are people who are working with a plan of 5 years, 10 years. Hisbawi Adara, those of you guys who have read and who have seen, go and read Hisbawi Adara of what they are doing, the plan they have in the coming 5 years, the coming 10 years, the coming 25 years, what they are going to do to us.
Thank you, Hadi.
And
We have a fourth panelist, or fifth panelist. I see a hand here. Zaytuna, can you come to the microphone? I'd just like to underscore, while Zaytuna comes to the microphone, that the point that Joanne, Eisen, and Haptamu are making is a very important one, that one particular interview does not make a case. But if there is a case to be made about a plan or a policy, you know, we've heard an accusation that this is a plan, this has to be proven by a range of people coming forward. And in their individual testimonies, if there is a similarity in what is done to them and what is said to them from east to west, north to south, this builds an evidence for a design, for a program, for intent. And I would urge you, if you have friends, not people who are reluctant, who have a story to tell but have been reluctant, to rethink that their case might contribute to the establishment of a pattern. And I think that is a very important implication for research that we have, that is revealed in this kind of work.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for giving me it.
The panelists wanted to comment to me. Go ahead.
Hello, I just wanted to say that the judges are very biased, and unless we have a lot of data, they will not find in favor of us. They will not find for genocide. So we need all that information. I'm sorry I broke
It's okay, no problem. Thank you for really writing this article. Who wrote, what's her name? I forgot. This article, I read it while I was in Botswana, and I'm really touched with it. And what happened is I just took the logo of, because I am from Oromo, and we went to Tunis for World Forum, social forum. And when we went there, I used it. I kept on, I just distributed to the organization everywhere. But all my life, I was speaking, talking with people wherever I go about torture, about people, Oromo people. And nobody really gave me attention. But when Amnesty International put down that real, written, and clear, people start giving me attention for real thing happening. And what I'm trying to say is, if we read and distribute to everywhere, we can get attention, as Advocacy was explaining. And also, this is like, it is like you are having evidence when you speak. If you have something clear, articles, clear logos from knowing Amnesty International, this kind of knowing, you will be given attention. People give you attention. Oh, this woman is not creating. This person is not creating. This is real. And I just want to say thank you for giving us a chance to write this. And when you are writing, or whoever writing, they take time, and they go through a lot of hardship. But whenever us, we don't read, or we don't follow, we don't support, that's also, it's not good. Thank you really very much. I want to say that.
Thank you, Zaytuna. I can remind you that this report is available online at no charge in a PDF. So if you search for this in Amnesty International, you can download this without having to pay for the full report. So it is fully accessible to everyone. Our time is coming up. I see 2 or 3 hands. The best way is to come to the microphone and stand rather than raise your hand. I think that this will be our last I'll give the panelists a chance to underscore their points in relation to what you're saying. We've reached our time. We've done extremely well in this conference to stay on time, probably the first time in history. We, we thank you, and I speak authoritatively on that one. And we thank our caterers for being here and allowing us to have a nice lunch without having to leave the building and come back with a long delay. So we will probably take one last question, and then if Felix, if you have something to add, Haptamu and Joanne, we will close the panel. I will take these comments, and any you want to send to me individually, privately, in the construction of a commentary on this report. So thank you for all of you for your input. Jairo?
No, I don't have any question. I just wanted to make some few remarks. There is a saying in Afaan Oromo, himata wallaalteetu jaarsa komatti jedha. Himata wallaalteetu jaarsa komatti. I invited an Oromo torture survivor from Norway to come here and testify at the UN Torture Survivors Week. And she said, "Lakki diinni koo na gammaddi." Therefore, she has to keep silent to herself so that her enemies enjoy her suffering. There is a culture of just acceptance. While those who brutalize even our intellectuals, due to the brutality of time, I didn't have the other part of the story to tell what they are doing to us. While we are not even willing to speak. I know people who have been tortured here. Come out and speak. It's not their right to come to your land and torture you. It's not their right. You have to say no.
Any closing remarks?
Sure. I just want to say that there are doing advocacy. We haven't talked too much about sort of advocacy strategies, but doing advocacy in Ethiopia, obviously completely different. Doing advocacy with international governments, there are so many Oromos everywhere. I mean, you can make this an issue for your elected officials. In Minnesota, I mean, if Oromos are organized and took hard evidence, which this Amnesty report provides, to your congressional officials, there's a lot they can actually do if you can make this an issue for them. You can also combine forces with the Somali, the Ogaden population in Minnesota, who have experienced many similar types of abuses in the Somali region. Like, there's so many things that a well-organized diaspora groups could do in partnership with organizations like Human Rights Watch to really further the goals of the Oromo people. So I just leave it at that.
Felix's call is really an important one, and you heard it. We need to, like, sort of like we speak here from the stage and so on and so forth. Oromo Studies Association is an annual conference. These issues need continuous, persistent planning and implementation, and possibly if Oromo lawyers can be organized under the Oromo Community Organization of North America, and the Oromo community funds the possibility of bringing some of the perpetrators of the heinous crimes to justice, at least in the US. There are people who are in the TPLF, who live in America, who under US law, immigrants cannot conduct torture in foreign countries and live here. But they come here and live here because nobody's filing any lawsuits against them and following up these issues. So I really think this is a bigger project that goes beyond efforts by human rights organizations and a few presenters, and it should be something that the community should really focus on and fund and organize lawyers and do these things very professionally in terms of bringing possibly human rights perpetrators or genocide perpetrators to justice. It should start. I know of a case of a Gambela man in England who won an issue of land grab. He filed a lawsuit in England, and he won. Even one person can do a job, but as a community, we have really failed the people back home who have no freedom to defend their rights. And this is an area of collective action where we could really come together and stop, bickering over minor differences and perceived, differences within Oromo politics and so on. So I invite you to do that, and thank you.
I'd just like to underscore how pleased we are to have Felix Horn with us here. And I think that I commend to you his reports. They want a confession was yours? No, it was your last two reports, particularly Journalism is Not a Crime, and they know everything we do, are the titles of these very good reports that have a lot of data and are good tools for introducing many of these issues to those who are unfamiliar with them. So thank you for being with us, Felix. And thank you for your groundbreaking work.
Thank you very much to Kabane and the wonderful panelists for the great presentation and for staying on time. As I warned you, I was able to make you pay back the 1 hour you stole from me in the morning. And I'm really happy to Kabane acknowledge that we were able to finish it on time. Thank you very much for cutting your lunch short and also for presenters for staying on time and cutting 2 or 3 minutes from your allotted 15 minutes. So we are about to conclude the conference for today. We will have another one tomorrow filled with great presentations. We have additional keynote speaker, Bubakar will be speaking tomorrow. For those of you who have been watching live, thank you for your feedbacks, and we will be back again with new link. We'll share the link tonight and tomorrow morning, and the live stream will start at 9 a.m. in tomorrow. We'll keep sharing, and if you see any technical problem, you can text me or you can send the text here, the messages here. Thank you, Abdamu. Thank you for reminding me. For those of you who are members, the Journal of Oromo Studies is available outside. It's included in your membership subscription fee. And for those of you who are not members, you can be a member and get the journal. Or if you don't want to be a member, if you are not really convinced yet, you can buy it. There are a lot of great articles in it. We highly encourage it. Now we will go to dinner and concert. There is a concert, as I said, featuring 2 great singers. Come out to support them. The revenue, the proceeds will be go to Oromo Studies to sponsor future conferences. And again, do not forget your name tags tomorrow morning. Please come on time tomorrow so that we can let you go home on time. If you come late, I'm going to keep you late tomorrow too. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow. Tonight, I'll see you tonight, and I'll see you right now after this.